Hey everybody, Troy here and welcome to video 9 of our PowerShell Fundamentals series. In this video we're going to dive into the topic of object members. Members is just a fancy word for PowerShell object properties and methods, and what I want to do is revisit the last video where we talked about this tool called getMember that showed us all the object properties and methods associated with a particular data type. In this video, what I want to do is revisit this whole concept of the object-oriented nature of PowerShell, just so we're crystal clear exactly what we're referring to. And we're going to talk about these members using this commandlet called getMember. That's going to display all the things we have to work with a particular type of PowerShell object. Now, what's important is that every type of object is a bit different. And in this video, I want to expand upon the different types of objects, and I want to show you how you can learn about them, how you can classify them, and how you can find additional help with these particular things, because it's not readily available within the actual PowerShell help documentation. I'm going to show you a concept of a tool called chaining, which we will probably take a good look at later on when we start applying more complicated scripts. But chaining will give us a great way to demonstrate properties and methods associated with different types of objects. And then finally, we're going to take a look at the PowerShell help documentation to understand exactly how those inputs and outputs work, because we're now getting into a spot where we're doing more complicated piping, and these inputs and outputs matter. We want to be sure that we understand them. Let's get at it. What we're going to do here is start off with a basic PowerShell session. And you see here, I got my scripting pane is closed off. All I'm going to do here is play in my CLI environment. Okay, let's revisit this whole object-oriented business, right? That's often a turn-off for people who don't want to be developers. People often say, if I wanted to be a software developer, I would have, taken CIS. In this world, we're applying this term of object-oriented to examine the nature of PowerShell itself. It's fundamentally interconnected with the .NET framework, which is an object-oriented environment. And we can see when we do a typical command, let's do get service. Brilliant. Okay, so I have hit get service, and I have got a series of properties, etc. here. Let's revisit what I'm talking about in terms of terminology. Now remember, you and I see a table here. I think you can agree that if I hit get service, PowerShell's presented a list of names of different services associated with their current status as they pertain to my computer. Now, this is what you and I might call a table. However, in PowerShell, this is properly considered what we call a collection. So this whole thing, all of this combination here, is what we refer to as a collection. So instead of table, we're using the word collection here. Now, a collection of what? Well, it's a collection of individual objects. Every line in this collection is an object. Okay, so we've got a collection of objects. Each object is a line, and every column is what we refer to as a property. So a collection consists of objects. Objects have properties. The objects are the horizontal row, and the properties are the vertical columns. Brilliant. But here's the thing. We know that services have more than 3 properties. They have more than just a name, a display name, and a status. The reason we're only seeing that is that PowerShell assumes that when I type get service without any further parameters, I'm just looking for something, and PowerShell is going to deliver what it thinks fits best on the screen, which we know is not everything that is associated with a service PowerShell object. And as we saw in our last video, if I were to pipe this particular commandlet into a different commandlet called getMember, I now have the opportunity to see all of the properties and methods associated with a service object. Now, let's break this down a bit further. So what I'm looking at here, after I piped into getMember, I'm seeing a list of all the members associated with the object. Those members are broken down into a couple key things. Fundamentally, what you're going to be playing with most of the time are properties, So these are the base properties that came with the services as they came out of the box. So these are properties associated with it. They either can or cannot be shut down, for example. They either can or cannot be stopped. They either can or cannot be paused and continued. They have a name. Well, they actually have a display name. They're very specific. The methods above, these things here, are things we can do to a service object. For example, I can start it or stop it or refresh it. I can dispose of it. So these are special things that I can do to a service object. Now, there's a couple other ones we didn't take a look at. Well, look up here. We have these things called alias properties. And these are special additions that PowerShell is adding to make our world easier. PowerShell, for example, wants everything to have a name. Well, services don't actually have a name. They actually have something called a service name. And I saw that right down there. So I have a service name. So to make my life easier, instead of making me type the property called service name, PowerShell's built in an alias called name, which is the equivalent of service name. You can see I've got another alias property here called required services, which is the same as services depended on. So it's just a weird way of saying it. So required services is an easier way than saying services depended on down there. Cool. Now you can see I've got a few of those properties. Now down here in the bottom, I have these things called script methods. We'll look at another get member in a moment here and see. This is PowerShell using something we call its extensible type system to these objects to go farther with them. I'll show you a different example. Let's look at a help for, let's go get process. I'm going to pass that off to get member as well. And you can see here, now I've got another breakdown here of this particular this particular member of our processes. I have more alias properties at the top. So you can see that there's my name. Now in the case of a process, the name equals the process name, not the service name. That was different. I have something called WS, which WS stands for working set 64. So if I scroll down, I'm going to see definitely that I have a whole bunch of properties, and one of those properties is my working set 64. So that means I know if I type in WS, I'm getting that property thanks to the alias. If I type in name, I am actually getting my process name, which is right there. I can use either. I can use the PowerShell formal one, or I can use the alias, which makes my life a little easier. But we came over here to take a look at some of these script properties here. Okay, now these are where PowerShell is trying to expand upon the information it has. It's taking all of these properties and the applicable methods to it, and it's adding to it. So it's taking something like CPU, and it's pulling more information out based on this little computation. So in this case, it's calculating the CPU cycles, or the weight of this process in CPU, which is basically a method of taking the processor time, the total processes per second. So it's a mathematical calculation for us, so we don't actually have to do that if we wanted to find that out. Things like the path and the product version, it's pulling from different pieces of the PowerShell environment to produce this information for us. And so these script properties here, these are additions to the object set that we can use to manipulate. They're not true properties, but they're derivatives. They're derived using this extensible type system. Okay, so you're going, awesome, Troy. Why do I need to know this? Well, let's go take a look at it again here. Let's go back to get service, and let's pipe this over. I'm going to use GM. That's my shortcut, my alias. And let's look at this again. Now, these are very important, because what we need to know is every single type of object is a certain object class or object type. This is something we call a system service process, service controller. Services fall into a very specific category of object. What that means is that this category of objects has certain methods that could be applied and certain properties that can be applied. Okay, and so for example, if I wanted to demonstrate this, I could show you with this method called chaining. Okay, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a quick variable. We haven't covered variables yet, but I'm going to show how easy it is to create a variable in PowerShell. Let's get a service. Okay, well, I know that one of my favorite services is called the spooler. Okay, cool. That is currently running. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable that pulls this spooler. I want the spooler to be the contents of a variable. Now again, don't stress. I'm going to get into variables in a later video, and we're going to carry into that deeper. So we're going to use that as a very fundamental part of our scripts. But I'm just simply going to use a $A, which is exactly how easy it is to create a variable in PowerShell. I'm going to say that variable called A will have the contents of get service with the name spooler. Okay, so what I've done here is I've created a variable called A, and I've said the contents of that variable will be the results of this commandlet. And if I ask PowerShell to display the contents of A, by typing it in, it says it's the contents of the, it's the return of the get service spooler. Okay, but here's what I can do. I want to show you how I can chain these particular methods and properties to that particular object. Okay, now so what I'm talking about here with my $A, the variable is an object. And I know that it is a service object. And at the top here, IntelliSense is telling me that I have a series of properties associated with it. Okay, I'm using the period, the dot, to chain that particular word name to the variable. What I'm saying to PowerShell is I want the property called name of the object in that particular variable. I'm going to do that, and it returns, it says your name is spooler. Cool, I knew that. Awesome. Let's ask for another property here. Okay, can it shut down? I want to know that. Okay, no, it's false. This particular object cannot be shut down. That property is false. Can it be stopped? Can it stop? True, I can stop it. Awesome. So these are properties that I'm finding associated with that particular service type of that object, that service object. Now what that means is I can actually I can go beyond my properties. I can go down the bottom here and I can see these are methods. These are things I can do to that particular object. And I just proven that I can stop it. Let's go down here and see. Oh yeah, there it is right there. Stop. Okay, I'm going to close my bracket and I'm going to hit the enter key. And now let's get service and see the status of my spooler. It's now stopped. So with this command here, I stopped the service called spooler. I chained it to the actual object and I executed a method to achieve what I wanted. Let's turn it back on. Well, I'm going to go back to my variable and I'm going to go start. Let's see, there it is. There's start. I'm going to close my bracket and let's see if that worked. It did. Okay, so what I'm trying to show you here is that these properties and methods can be chained to the object. These are extensions of that object, and I can use a process called chaining to assist me with it. Chaining is something we will do in scripts later on. I'm not asking you to understand chaining at this point. What I'm asking you to do is understand that there are certain methods and properties associated with this class of object. This class of object is a very special class of object. Let's go back and compare this to my get process. I'm going to pipe that to get member. And now look something very important. Okay, we remember that the service object was a system service object. Get process is a system diagnostics process object. It's a different object class altogether. And as a result, it has a completely different set of methods and a completely different set of properties. So all of these are very different. So while both of them are PowerShell objects, they have different properties and methods that I can work with. Let me show you an example. Well, I know that I could stop a service, right? No problem. Let's take a look here. Where's my method that lets me stop the process. Well, if you see my methods, I don't actually have a stop. There's a start. Okay, there's a toString. There's no stop method that I can apply to a process. There's a kill, however, and that is because this is a different type of object. This object has different types of properties, many, many, many more properties than my service did, and I can use these to pull information out of them. Now let's take a look at an example here. I'm gonna go back to my variable A, and I'm gonna reallocate the contents of the variable A here, let me do this. I'm going to start a calculator. Okay, there's my process right there. Okay, so I'm running a process called calculator. I'm going to go A, and I'm going to say the contents of variable A will be the process called calculator. There it is. Let me revisit A, and A gives me the properties, a subset of the properties associated with the object called calculator. That's the name of it. Now, again, I can apply methods and properties to it using the chain. I'm going to type a period, and here we go. Let's see, these are my properties. Let's find the working set property, which is 553411056. Right up here. This is in kilobytes. This is in kilobytes. This is in bytes. And so you can see that this is a slightly different around here. Now, I can also use my methods to it. And if I scroll down, those are the methods that I can apply to it. They're starting in purple. All those were properties. Well, remember, I don't have a stop, but I definitely have a kill. Okay, and let's grab my calculator here. There it is right there. And when I hit this button here, that calculator is gone. And I can verify that by taking a look at my get process name, and I can see there is no calculator. It's gone because that process was killed, and I applied a different method to it. So getting back to why I was talking about this, a different type of object altogether. So now this becomes important because, again, I need to often have these things connected. Well, how do I learn about these things? How do I find out what's unique about this? Because I know that when I type in help get process, even when I do the dash full, I'm not getting information about all its properties. I'm getting information about how to use the commandlet called get process. That's what I'm using. This is what the help is telling me. This get process commandlet has information about how to execute it, but it doesn't tell me about the objects that it's applying to. These special kind of diagnostic process objects, well, how do I find out what they are? Well, this is unfortunately the time that I have to go to my friend, the internet. What I need to do is I need to pop into my browser of my choice, and I've got to take a look at the Microsoft help. Okay, now earlier in the class I gave you a list of the Microsoft official documentation on PowerShell. This is from that, and this is where the actual goods are. This is where the information is. The process class, it is in what we call the system diagnostics namespace, which is something we're going to get into toward the end of the semester. This is a class of system diagnostic objects, and I have examples of where and when they may be used, but there's a ton of valuable information that tells me more about these processes. And this is where I can read. This is kind of like an about file. And if I keep going down, you can see, oh, here's my properties. Okay, and so here are the information that I need. What is the machine name property? It is the name of the computer that of the associated process is running on. What is the max working set? That is the maximum allowable working set size. Great. So if I didn't know what it was, I found the help documentation to answer that question. I can scroll down and look in the methods, and these are the things that I can chain to these objects to actually apply or do something to it, such as kill. Brilliant. And if I wanted to go back and take a look at that special process called, let's go take a look at, I'm going to go here and do a get service. I'm going to I'm going to pipe that to get member, and you see a whole different class of object. So what's important is that I'm dealing with a completely different class of object here, and I'll tell you why that's relevant in a moment. I'm going to go back now, and let's open up my browser again. Okay, so what I need to do is go back to my Google here. That's what I'm looking for. Let's drop you in there. Okay, and again, fortunately, the very first, I'm just cutting and pasting, and so the very first hit in Google is information about my service controller class. It's a process, and again, examples of how I'd use it, right down to details about the properties and methods. Brilliant. Let's look at one last type of service class. Okay, I'm going to go back here and bring up, let's do one more here. I'm going to go with a very simple one. I'm going to create a variable with the word hello in it. Okay, this is a simple string. When I ask PowerShell to provide the contents of the variable A, it says the contents are the word hello. It's the 5 characters that make up the word hello. Now let's pipe this to get member. Well, what I want to do, I can pipe the variable into get member, and it says, okay, I recognize this as a string, a completely different class of object, and you can see that I have a whole bunch of methods that I can apply to a string, but a string only has one single property, the length. So if I wanted to apply that property to it, if I was chaining, you see the length, the single solitary property is length. It is 5 characters long. That's how big that string is. But I can do some funny things with the methods. So if I wanted to chain, let's do something like, let's convert it to upper. Cool. Okay, so I want to convert my word hello from lowercase to uppercase. So it took the contents of that variable, the string, and I applied a method to it to change the contents of it. I could use one of the good ones is, there's replace. Okay, so replace lets me take, say, the L, better stick with the uppercase here, and I'm going to replace those, let me see, the L's with Z's. Sure, see if that works. And oops, nope, it did not. It put me back into my lowercase. Let's actually apply that again. That's what I want. And I'm going to replace L's with Z's. There we go. So that worked. So it didn't work as an uppercase, but it did work as a lowercase, and you can see that I've replaced the L's with the Z's. Cool. Okay, but again, the most important takeaway, different type of object. Now, you understand now that every object falls into a different class. Get member tells me the class that it's in, as well as all the members associated with that object class. Those consist of methods, those consist of properties, those consist of alias properties, and they also consist of script properties. And those are combined to give me all the tools I need to work with that type of object. But what's really important here as we move into our piping is that not all objects talk well with other objects. Let's take a look at get service again. And I'm going to add I'm going to get some help on get service. And let's get the full help. Because in a previous video I showed you this right here. Okay, so this input and output section. The first time I showed it to you, I wanted you to decide whether it either accepted inputs or provided outputs. That was the task. What I need you to now know is that every type of input is different. It only accepts input of a certain type. In this case, a service process or a string. Those are the only two things, the only type of objects that I can feed into a service get service commandlet. When the output is created, it is created in the form of a system service process service controller object. Now that means if I were to compare that to, let's go help to get process dash full, and I go back and take a look at my input and output options here, these inputs and outputs. All right, completely different class of object. The output is a process, a file version info diagnostic, or a process module. It is not a service, what that means is that I'm going to have problems if I went to something like get service and I started piping that into get process. They're completely different classes of objects. And if I try to feed a service object into get process, what's expecting a process object, the names, properties, methods, all of it is going to be different, and crisis. So I got nothing but red and horror and pain and doom and trauma. And that's all because we're dealing with different types of objects. It's expecting process objects, but I gave it service objects. Now, as we start getting further into our piping, these types of object classes are going to become more and more important because we're moving into scripting now, and the scripts are one long pipe. So if I wanted to execute multiple commandlets inside one script, these object types become very, very important. They're completely surmountable because we can architect our script in such a way where we acknowledge that pipeline, but what's really important is we understand these types of objects. Okay, so let's take a look at what we covered here. What I really wanted you to walk away with was a revisit of that object-oriented PowerShell nature, right? We know that we have collections of objects that have properties, methods, and alias method. All of those are called members. If we want to read and learn about the members available to every type of PowerShell object, we use the getMember command. We pipe it into GM. GetMember tells us the different types of member, the member types, and tells us all about the functions and the methods associated with that. Sorry, the properties and the methods associated with that. Unfortunately, inside PowerShell help, though, I don't have my information at my fingertips. The help is defined to give me information about the commandlets, not the actual information about the objects. I have to move to the actual official Microsoft documentation to learn about those objects. I can use chaining as a means to apply properties and methods. So you saw that I just simply created a small variable to keep it nice and simple, but that dot to a property or a method allowed me to manipulate that object in a nice simple way. But most importantly, we have to understand that every commandlet has a certain capability for input and output, and it's expecting or delivering information in a specific object class. And now we understand the difference between those classes. And so now we understand, as we apply these, when we start piping commandlets into other commandlets, they're going to be of the same object type to allow us to do this. Now, PowerShell lets us convert or build custom objects, which is something we're going to be looking at in the future. So we could actually get very creative, but at this point in time, we're going to stay in our lane and make sure that we understand the default nature of these commandlets. So when we start piping, we are going to do so successfully. Hope that helped. We're going to see you in the next video where we start sorting, selecting, and manipulating objects a bit further. Have a good one.